I love Celeste. This platformer is among my favorite games of all time. The simple yet challenging platforming is everything from tricky to downright excruciating. The level design is phenomenal. I listen to the music of the game almost daily, the pixel art is fantastic, the story is so charming, and I've put in over 250 hours and am still not even close to finished with this game. Part of me would love to try my hand at reviewing Celeste in depth, but reviewing is hard. Subjectivity reigns supreme, and having opinions that differ from the norm can be a death sentence here on the internet. So, I'm not going to review this game. Instead, I'm going to take a look at whether or not this game is fair. I can take a look into the mechanics of the game and break it down into pieces. I'm going to go through all of the challenges of the game to see if it is truly and wholly playable independently. This is going to be as objective as I can, though you should know that it's impossible to leave bias and opinion totally by the wayside. Gameplay spoilers are abound, but if you don't want those, you can click on the iCard in the corner to go to the Too Long Didn't Watch video, which is just a few minutes long and won't have any spoilers. If you're really short on time, you can also go to this time in this video to just see the scores. But if you love Celeste like I do and have a bit of time on your hands, I'd encourage you to sit back, kick up your feet with a cup of coffee, and get ready to dive into this incredible game. Hi, my name is Volcaronite, and today we are gonna crack Celeste. Celeste is a game with a lot of content. "25 chapters, each filled with challenging platforming requirements. Throughout are tons of collectibles. Seriously, this game has like hundreds of various things to collect. The great thing is, most of these are not required to see the end of the game. But what is the end of Celeste? If you've played Celeste, you know that the game actually has quite a few different endings. At the end of every level, or chapter, you're presented with a piece of art from the game's story. Though each of these is an ending of a sort, that's not really what is normally meant by an ending. No, the way I see it, Celeste has 5 different endings, which you see in this order. This is the one that you get when you complete the story, but it's not really the end. If you're looking to see the game through regularly, I'd say this is your ending, the heart of the mountain. Just making it to the summit before this is selling the game short, and continuing beyond this sees you into the game's most trying challenges. I'm glad there's so much more content to explore after this ending, but if you see this screen, you've completed the game. Okay, but why does this matter? I mean, if we're just looking to see if a game is fair, then who cares about the end of the game? Well, what we need to do today is figure out what collectibles and challenges require completing to arrive at any of these endings and decide whether or not these are fair. As I said earlier, Celeste has a lot of collectibles. 202 strawberries, broken down here by regular, golden, and unique variants. Celeste has 8 green flags and 8 gold flags. There's also 24 crystal hearts, 8 blue, 8 red, 8 yellow. There are 8 cassette tapes. Finally, there's a single collectible bluebird and a single collectible minigame. If we put these collectibles onto our endings chart, it looks like this. The summit has only 7 required collectibles, the first 7 green flags. The only thing that you need to do in order to achieve this ending is to complete each of the first 7 levels. The Heart of the Mountain ending requires a little more. You need to get that 8th and final green flag, as well as any 4 crystal hearts. While they can be any 4 hearts in theory, you won't be able to access any of the yellow hearts before achieving this ending, so the 4 hearts to collect will be either blue or red. In achieving the Heart of the Mountain ending, you'll be required to collect a single B-side cassette and a single blue heart, both for Chapter 8. Farewell requires several more collectibles. You'll have to collect 16 crystal hearts, all 8 blue hearts from the A-sides, and all 8 red hearts from the B-sides. That means you'll also have to have collected all 8 B-side cassettes. Through completing the Farewell chapter, you'll get the collectible bluebird, which is functionally the same as a green flag. By the way, if you're yelling at your screen saying, "That's not true, dumb video man added extra collectibles, has he even played the game?" Pause now. Content Complete, or the Seaside ending, requires the 8 yellow hearts. You unlock the Seasides for every level by completing the core B-side, which you'll have already done through achieving the Farewell ending. Finally, all the other collectibles are bunched together in the 100% ending. That includes the 8 gold flags, all 202 strawberries, and the minigame. Take a good look at this chart, because this is the entirety of Celeste's gameplay progression distilled down to a single screen. Also, keep in mind that every ending requires all of the previous endings as well. So, for example, the farewell ending requires its own collectibles, as well as the summit and heart of the mountain endings. Maybe that's obvious, but I think it's worth pointing out. Got it? Good. Now, let's start our fairness analysis by focusing in on the heart of the mountain ending. We'll start with those flags. You get them by completing the 8 A-side chapters. Basically, if the levels are fair, then the flags are fair. So, are the levels fair? Let's take a look. We're going to break down the prologue and chapter 1 to figure out what fair even is. We can look at the different tutorials and challenges that the game presents to you as you make your way through to see what they look like. Some games have their main mechanics taught through implicit tutorials. One of the most popular examples of this is the original Super Mario Bros. Game. A lot of gamers and analysts love this kind of tutorial, lavishing praise onto it as the most immersive and effective kind of tutorial. I am less enthusiastic. An implicit tutorial is basically a way for a game to force you to learn a mechanic before moving on by making a challenge insurmountable without it. In the case of Super Mario Bros., this Goomba will consistently kill the player until they learn to press the A button while advancing to jump over it. Basically, learning the mechanics comes down to a guessing game of trying the various available inputs to see which ones work. Perhaps in the days of the NES, the controller of which had a total of 8 buttons, this kind of tutorial could be effective. But for a game like Celeste, teaching the mechanics this way would not be effective. Death in Celeste is not exactly punishing by any stretch of the imagination, at least not this early on in the game. But the controllers of today have 20 or more inputs. I played Celeste on the Switch, and I can say it would be pretty difficult to use this implicit method of teaching main mechanics. Movement and jumping do use this implicit tutorial design. While certainly not ideal, this is forgivable for a platformer. After all, basically every 2D platformer for the past 40 years has had the same inputs for movement and jumping. While it would be nice to see a game teach the fundamental and universal mechanics of movement in a way that would be both revelatory for someone who has never played a game before while not being intrusive to a platforming veteran, this is certainly forgivable. Fortunately, the primary mechanics of movement unique to Celeste are taught very explicitly. You're taught to climb by a bluebird with a text box in a safe place. The same bluebird even freezes time to give you ample opportunity to learn to dash. The tutorials aren't perfect. Again, for someone who's new to gaming in general, it would be nice for the game to explain that the ability to climb is a limited resource replenished by standing on the ground, or that dashing can be done in all 8 directions. You're also never taught about wall jumping, a required move and one that might not be obvious, even to some players who are familiar with games. But for most players, this tutorial is more than adequate. So, movement tutorials are good. Not perfect, certainly, but sufficient. However, there's a second type of tutorial that players might need: level design tutorials. This is where Celeste starts to falter. The tutorials for all level design mechanics are implicit. They're trial and error. For the first level, you're presented with spikes, springs, collapsing platforms, dash replenishing crystals, one-way semi-solid platforms, falling platforms, and this level's unique mechanic, platforms on tracks that shoot rapidly across those tracks when a player lands or climbs on them. That's a lot of mechanics to learn, and most of them are like that Goomba. They'll kill you if you mess up. This would be a pretty big problem for a lot of games, but it's easy to forgive Celeste because death in this game is so quick and seamless, and it resets you to the beginning of the very challenge you just failed. While we're talking about implicit versus explicit tutorial design, I'd like to say that I don't find either to be unambiguously superior to the other. Explicit tutorials are usually very clear, especially for more important or complex mechanics, and are better as an objective teaching tool, but an abundance of these kinds of tutorials can be distracting and exhausting on a gameplay level. Implicit tutorials are usually more seamless and invisible, and they teach the player important rules or mechanics without the player even realizing that they're learning. But implicit tutorials are much easier to mess up from a design standpoint, because if a mechanic is too complex to understand after a moment of observation, or if the punishment for failing to learn is too harsh, then this leads to frustration rather than an invisible learning process. Both types have their pros and cons. I think Celeste strikes a good, if imperfect, balance. The tutorials for dashing and especially for climbing are excellent. These are critically important and relatively complex mechanics that aren't really intuitive, so getting these instructions is welcome. I particularly love this climbing tutorial since it's dynamic. It asks for the required inputs, and as the player applies them, it changes with what other inputs are needed. You can see that it teaches climbing in 2 steps. First, grab onto the wall by holding down the climb button, in my case the trigger, and then use your movement mechanic to scale up and down. It's unobtrusive but highly informative and doesn't interrupt gameplay. This is great. The implicit tutorials are, for the most part, also good. Despite introducing 2 mechanics in this prologue that are never used again for the entire game, the level mechanics in the prologue are simple enough to grasp after the slightest bit of observation. Since we've already discussed how minor a punishment death really is in Celeste, then we can tick off that second common pitfall of implicit design for almost every mechanic. They're easy to understand, and if you mess up, you pop right back to where you started so you can try again. A player could probably get 20 tries or more for some of these mechanics in a minute, which is absolutely great. For most mechanics, this system works. The only mechanic for which this implicit tutorial doesn't work is this, the falling platform. This first chapter introduces them in a segment over the void, which has been taught to mean death. Upon first entering the room, you grab onto or land atop this first platform and you plummet to your death. Great. There's no way you could have learned this earlier either. These platforms aren't unique. Blue, free-floating platforms appear in several places before this, and those platforms are fine. Some even have spikes on them, just like these ones. They don't have to be over void, since some fall and slide into place as part of the challenge. They even appear in the same room together. Right here, where this free-floating blue platform can stay put, but this one attached to it falls. As you play, you eventually learn that a platform could fall if it is a single color and is only 4-sided. But many other platforms meet these requirements too and don't fall. Additionally, as the game progresses, many falling platforms are of different colors and textures. Sometimes that color is distinct from the general colors of the level geometry, and sometimes they aren't. Some have spikes, some don't. Some are touching the borders of another piece of the level, and some are truly free-floating. With this understanding, we can use these as a measure of fairness. They are unpredictable and unforeseeable. Someone who has truly mastered the game of Celeste could see a platform like this and not be able to tell if it is a falling platform or not. There is no way to tell, because a distinction does not exist. If you see this platform, you know that it will collapse, period. This platform shoots across its track. This one will launch you into the air. They always act the same. They may be taught by killing you, but you can see them, learn them, recognize them for the future, and eventually master them. Falling platforms can never be mastered, so I'm going to label them as unfair. So that's settled then. A fair mechanic is one that you can master. It is predictable and recognizable, it is consistent, it is required. Now, we can look at all the mechanics the game presents that are required to collect those 8 green flags, and see which are fair and which are not. Here they are, organized by the chapter they are first required in. You may recognize some of these mechanics as present in earlier levels. For example, I have the breakable block mechanic as being introduced in chapter 2, even though it is present in chapter 1. But even though there are 4 places in chapter 1 where you can learn this mechanic, it is never required for completion. Only for strawberries, which, as I explained, are optional. In chapter 2, you have to learn it here in order to advance. You may also see a few mechanics missing here. For example, the false wall isn't listed. Though it is a common mechanic spread out over all the levels, it is never required to progress, and as such, will not be discussed for the requirements of obtaining those green flags. Great. Now I'm going to take a bunch of these away that are easily identifiable as fair. Some of these are tricky, many are annoying, but they're all recognizable, predictable, and consistent. Dream blocks have the same mechanics no matter what. Buttons come in several shapes, sizes, and colors, but they all serve predictable functions. The wind is garbage, but it's either consistent or changes periodically. These are all fair at face value, and I won't be going into detail on them. What remains are those mechanics which are not apparently fair. As you can see, there's not too many. Celeste does a pretty good job of keeping itself free of any randomness, bugs, or anything else that might lead to an unfair mechanic. We've got just 3 here. The falling platforms I already talked about, these red blocks from chapter 5 that I like to call fish blocks, and these blocks here, which are introduced in chapter 6 and are canonically called Kevin. There's actually a couple more mechanics that I'd like to take a closer look at, but I'm going to save those for a bit later. Let's start with these, the fish blocks. They're pretty simple, and you learn about them in the segment where you take over a fish monster in the middle of chapter 5. Basically, the fish can destroy them, but the player can't really do anything to them. Simple enough, and they make for a kind of small-scale dynamic level design. On their own, the fish blocks aren't a problem. The problem is this. They can hide things. There's a strawberry behind this one, and a platform key behind this one. More than that, you have this one that hides nothing, but is required for progression. You can't see these from the outside, so it's not actually possible to tell if there's something behind a fish block that you need to progress. In fact, you only need to break 2 of these in order to progress, but there are 26 in total. I'm hesitant to call this an unfair mechanic. After all, there's nothing inherently unpredictable about these fish blocks. The blocks themselves will always react in exactly the same way, but the fact that they do occasionally hide required progression tools while almost always being much more useful for navigation when they aren't smashed, this creates a sort of catch-22. You need to break all the blocks to see if they hold something needed to advance, but the act of breaking blocks will usually make advancing more difficult since they're better to be used as platforms. Breaking these blocks entails a substantial risk to your current life. While we've discussed that death in Celeste is a pretty minor punishment if it teaches you a mechanic, you're not learning here. Breaking a block only serves to see what is under that block. A master of the game would still need to break every single fish block to see if it holds anything, and for that reason, I'm going to label these fish blocks as unfair. Let's now turn to Kevin. These beautiful blocks are platforms that the player can control. By dashing into any of the blue-colored sides, Kevin lets out a heavenly hum and goes flying in the direction of that side. This allows for some interesting movement when platforming is combined with Kevin, and all seems fair on the surface. Here's the issue. Kevin can break through certain parts of the level geometry. These parts are almost always positioned as pillars, vertically or horizontally, and can appear to be fully attached to the rest of the wall. But upon contact, Kevin smashes right through them and keeps on flying. There's no indication of which walls these are at first glance, but if you pay attention, the walls that Kevin can destroy are always relatively narrow, they obstruct the path of progression, there is an air gap on both sides, and the player can't smash through these walls. Well, they can't usually. There are 2 instances where the player can smash through these walls, right here to free Kevin, and in this room where there isn't any Kevin present. Along with these, there's a single Kevin breakable wall that follows none of the rules of most walls. It's this one, where it's not attached, not narrow, and not fully obstructive to the path. Let's take a look at these though, because even though they may seem to behave differently than they should, this isn't actually the case. You can see that for the walls that you can break without Kevin, that Kevin isn't actually available. The walls would be unbreakable if they required Kevin, and progression would be impossible. Since these walls are only breakable when Kevin is not present, it turns out they can be mastered and are fair for that reason. This wall that doesn't follow the rules is a little strange too. In fact, it acts more like a falling block than a wall for Kevin to break. I tried to get over to it legitimately, but after a few failures, I went ahead and turned on some cheats. Sure enough, this wall actually is a falling block. We've already discussed the unfairness of these blocks at length, but it's appropriate to say that the unfairness here lies with the blocks, not Kevin. So, Kevin is fair. And that's it. If you're going for the summit and all you need are those green flags, then you're going to have a good time. These 2 unfair mechanics do hinder the climb a little bit, but it's very minor compared to the rest of the game. But as we talked about, Summit isn't really a good ending to Celeste. We really want to see the Heart of the Mountain ending, and to do that, there's a few more things we need to collect. After completing the summit, you'll unlock Chapter 8, The Core. Entering this place for the first time will see your dash mechanics warped, and you'll almost immediately run into this barrier here. This is one of 4 heart barriers in the game. To bypass it, you're going to need to collect crystal hearts. In this case, 4 of them. Where can you find these? Well, everywhere. Every side of a chapter has a heart, making 24 in total. B and C sides reward you with a red and yellow heart respectively as a completion condition. The level that we're trying to enter, the core, does the same thing with a blue heart, but all of the other A sides have blue hearts too. There's secret hidden collectibles placed in each level. More than likely, even if you haven't collected any, you've seen some of the signs of these hearts. Through completing Chapter 3 normally, you'll have to enter this room here, which shows the location of the chapter's crystal heart. Inaccessible from here, but visible. If you've done a little poking around, you've probably also seen some of the locations of the other hearts too. This computer terminal in Chapter 1, perhaps the boxed heart at the end of Chapter 2. Maybe you've run into this key door from Chapter 5, and you've more than likely seen at least one of the collectible gems from Chapter 7. These are all the places where crystal hearts can be found. In order to break through the heart barrier for the core, you're going to have to nab at least 4 of these crystal hearts. These can be infuriatingly challenging to find in most cases, and you need over half. Let's take a closer look at each one and discuss whether it's a fair requirement. Though it would be great if each one of them were fair, we really only need 4 in order to say that the Heart of the Mountain ending is fair. Before Before we go any further, we need to take a look at one of those mechanics from earlier that I kept hidden, the false wall. False walls are these, parts of the level geometry that appear to be regular walls, but in fact have no collision. When you make contact with one of these, you simply pass through and investigate something that it hides, either a secret platform or access to another room, or both. There's a few different ways these can appear. Some look like this one from chapter 7. There's obviously something here. This is too blatant and obvious to simply be nothing. When you see this, it's pretty clear that you should make your way to this location because something sits just beyond. Some look like this one from chapter 1. You can see a gap that should clearly be accessible, but there's no obvious way to get there. What you have to do is run into the adjacent wall by dropping this block in order to reveal a passageway to the gap. This is certainly less clear than the previous kind of false wall, but it should be intriguing enough to players that they will try to access it. Plus, there isn't really an instance of an exit or a gap in a room that isn't connected by a false wall, so I'd say this is fair too. If these two were the way that most false walls were, then I'd have no problem with them. However, there is one more type of false wall, this type. There's no indication of a false wall here. There's nothing different about this wall, nothing unique, and yet there's an important pathway behind it, a critical one in fact for seeing content. This is patently unfair. Seeing a false wall like this, or this, or this, or any of the others that exist all over the game means that the player, should they wish to see everything the game has to offer, must touch and dash into every piece of every wall in order to see what's there. This expectation is blatantly unfair. Well, kind of. See, even though I think it's unfair for the game to expect this, it's common enough that it must be the intention of the game to have players want to explore the edges of screens to find these little secrets. This level of obscurity is expected by the game sometimes, I think. We're back to what I wanted to avoid in the first place, subjectivity. But there's no way to avoid it here, so we're gonna lean into it. I am an idiot. Thusly, I'm going to use my patent-pending, not at all arbitrary obscurity test called the idiot test, or the I didn't independently observe this test. This will determine if a secret, puzzle, or progression piece was too obscure for me to solve it without external help, if there's no other way to objectively determine fairness. Keep in mind that this is a fairly weak standard, and your own gameplay experiences may vary. Basically, I'll be applying my own experiences to what was supposed to be an objective look at the game. Destroy me. With that out of the way, let's go through each heart to see if it works. The chapter 1 heart can be found slightly out of the way here. You access it by breaking through this false wall. This wall passes the idiot test because of this sign pointing up. I was intrigued by it since progression through the level thus far primarily requires you to proceed to the right. So I used this grab launch block to throw myself into the crevice and presto, access to the next room. I completed the challenge, collected the berry, and arrived at the computer terminal. It took me a couple of minutes to figure out what was going on, but if you look closely you can see. The terminal flashes a sequence of colors, and the birds on the left, each one a color of the sequence, all dash out in a specific direction. I figured out that the sequence was an order, and the birds were directions to dash in, kind of like a combination lock. In fact, that's exactly what this requires. Chapter 1's Crystal Heart passes the idiot test. It's fair. The second heart is more problematic. I first discovered it while poking around at the end of the level. The platforms line up in such a way that you can jump up and see the heart inaccessible in this poem. The poem's meaning was crystal clear. Basically, I had to find this heart before waking up in the story progression. So I tried. I probably spent 20 minutes on each screen of the level, trying to find a false wall or a breakable border, anything to get out and grab that heart. These two rooms in particular teased me with access to the outside by showing some platforms that looked navigable. If you've collected the heart yourself, you'll know that none of this is actually accessible and that the answer is right here on the first two screens. See, Celeste has this quirk where if you dash across a screen transition, your dash is replenished. This is always true from the very beginning. You're never forced to use it, but the game does gently encourage you to learn the mechanic at a couple of places early on in chapter 3. This key, required to progress, is placed just out of reach for a regular jump dash. You can navigate these vertical platforms, or you can experiment with dashing between the two screens here to grab the key. This strawberry, also at the beginning of chapter 3, is reachable with a little bit of advanced Celeste tech that you're explicitly taught late in the game, but is much easier to access by dashing across this transition. This quirk becomes a full-on feature in chapter 8. In fact, if you've made it to the heart barrier, you've already seen it in action. Because they don't regenerate normally in this chapter, dashes in chapter 8 can only be restored in a precious few ways. One of them being the screen transition. Right here is the only transition before the barrier, but you need to use a dash to make it across this jump, and crossing the transition regenerates your dashes. To access the Chapter 2 heart, you need to use this screen transition restoration trick here at the very beginning. Use every last bit of your stamina and your dash to make it up the next screen here, which restores your stamina as well. Then carefully dash up and down along this horizontal transition, make it to the edge, then finally climb up to the screen above to collect the heart. This one is very borderline, and I can't see another way to determine whether or not this was fair. But I never thought to do this when I played the game, so it fails the idiot test. It's unfair. Chapter 3 is where I learned that hearts exist. You're forced to see a crystal heart upon entering this room required for progression. Because I knew that Celeste didn't have impossible maps, or rooms that would overlap each other if they were all placed on one screen, I figured that the entrance was here, the middle route, through this false wall, and blocked by towels. So I had to come here after pressing the button that cleans the towels. Sure enough, the middle route is the one that leads to the towels, and upon pressing this button to clean them, I knew that the answer had to be in the same room. After all, the way I just came had been closed up, and leaving this room would block me from ever re-entering it again. So I proceeded to explore and dash into every nook and cranny, and eventually found that the waterfall to the right actually contains a false wall that leads to a short path back through the section I had just navigated, allowing access to the crystal heart near the beginning. There are other waterfalls, both in this path and others, with at least as much space in the ceiling from where it originates, so it's not consistent in that way. But this is a matter of obscurity, and it passes the idiot test, so I guess it's fair. Barely. We're going to skip Chapter 4 for the time being. Don't worry, we'll be back, and move on to Chapter 5. Instead of explaining to you how I tried and failed to find the heart, I'm going to give you a grand tour of the room where the secret to collecting the heart is. Did you see it? Let's try again. Look closely this time. Okay, now did you see it? No? Because I sure didn't. See, I discovered this locked door a bit later into the chapter on my very first playthrough of the game and figured that I just needed an extra key. I went back in looking for the key and nope, couldn't find it. I was stumped. My guess is that unless you already know the answer, you have no idea what to do either. Let's go back to that room we toured a moment ago. In the regular progression, you're supposed to take the key that you find through exploration and unlock this locked door. However, if you want to collect the heart, you have to instead notice that this platform, one that you just flew by at top speed with no control by the way, has a tiny unlit gap at the bottom which you need to go back to, dash up into, and bypass this door through an otherwise invisible passageway at the top of the screen. You keep your key for that locked door later on and get to use it to access the heart room. This is so obtuse that its fairness isn't even a question as far as I'm concerned. The level of observation required to see this is kind of nuts and far above what's required for the rest of the game. There's no other place in the entire game where you have to use the red bubbles in this way, but you need to here. This fails the idiot test with flying colors, I guess. The heart for Chapter 6 is almost universally reviled for its obscurity. Finding the location is tricky enough, but a fun challenge. A keen eye can spot this feather hiding in the ground here, and a bit of flying around will get you to this ledge far above the feather. The sign here points in the direction that you go, and the next feather gives you a way to get there. You make your way over, and you arrive at this room. What? Let's not beat around the bush. The colors here is the same for those from the heart puzzle in Chapter 1. The same order, too. Let's be generous and assume that since we called that puzzle fair, this part must be too. Okay, but what do the torches mean? What about these triangles? Are they arrows, shapes? And why is this one blank? It turns out that they represent reflections. You have to do the same pattern from Chapter 1, which lights up the first torch. You then repeat it, inverting the horizontal directions. That's torch 2. Again, but inverting the vertical directions, torch 3. Finally, you have to invert both the horizontal and vertical directions to get that fourth torch summoning your heart. Those who argue in favor of this challenge argue that the chapter title is the clue, but you're never asked for something like this before or again. No arguments. This fails the idiot test even more than the heart from Chapter 5. Finally, we arrive at Chapter 7. The heart mechanic here is unique because the heart itself is near the end of the chapter, right here. It's barely hidden. The challenge is that you need to collect the 6 gemstones that are displayed below the ground here. You've had to climb through 6 sections to arrive here, so it stands to reason that you'll need to find a gemstone in each section. The first gemstone is at the very, very end of the section. It's a little tricky to spot, but by this point, you'll probably notice that this ledge has no spikes on it. It even has a pretty little flower to signify that it's safe. Aw, thumbs up from me. The The second gemstone is quite a bit trickier. Near the beginning, the path splits. The right path is a more direct route through the level and is considerably easier. Taking the left path leads you to a tricky platforming challenge, which leads to another challenge. Looking very closely, you can notice a teeny tiny gap in the floor here. We're going to talk about this mechanic more towards the end of the video, but for right now, we're going to call this gemstone borderline and come back to it if we need to. The third gemstone is even trickier, and the next most difficult Notice Me challenge in the game after the ridiculous one from the Chapter 5 Crystal Heart. In an optional path that has multiple entrances, you need to dash through a pair of dream blocks here. If you pay very close attention though, you can just make out that the wall to the side is deteriorated just a bit. Dashing into it destroys it and leads to a very tough challenge. This is one of the only breakable borders in the entire game which isn't separated visually from the wall around it. This inconsistency means that it's an unfair challenge. This makes the Crystal Heart for Chapter 7 unfair, but we're going to keep going because it gets even worse. The fourth gem is behind the false wall I used as an example for the very obvious kind of false wall earlier. The platforming challenge behind it is tough, but entirely fair. The fifth gem is the worst offender of the bunch. You need to discover multiple false walls in the ceiling across rooms, navigating in a strange way that seems almost broken. The false walls are recessed, sure, but the entire ceiling here looks exactly the same. It appears that this is just the design of the room, as if there's stalactites or something. I saw this the first time, tried a little bit to get up to the ceiling, and gave up. I thought it was just some visual flavor, a room on the border with nothing, like the car at the very beginning of the game. But no, this path does exist, and it hides the gem. It definitely fails the idiot test. The sixth and final gem is a little better. You need to discover not one, but two false walls. More than that, they're completely indiscernible, flush with the wall, and very narrow. You're supposed to take the red bubbles and smash into the wall to open the path. You have to do this twice to make it to the gemstone room, but after the first time, you can see what you have to do. It's also possible to see the route to the Crystal Heart room above the main route, so you'll know you missed something even if you don't know how to get back. This is an obscurity factor, so I would use the idiot test, but I actually did discover this accidentally. It's in the very first room of the section, so I hadn't even begun the search for the gemstone yet. I jumped into the bubble, accidentally shot off the wrong way, and stumbled into this room. I naturally proceeded to do the same thing with the next bubble, and it worked. This is, again, very borderline, but I'm going to say that this is just barely fair. There are a few other walls that you can break with red bubbles, and they are more obviously false walls. I don't love it, but I'll call it fair. Even so, this seventh heart challenge is an unfair challenge. That means that only 2 of the hearts we've looked at are fair to collect. I know we skipped the 4th heart, and we'll come back to it, I promise, but it doesn't matter. We need 4 to break this heart barrier. It can't be done. Or can it? See, there's actually another set of hearts available to you before you break that heart barrier from the core, and those are the B-side hearts. B-sides are shorter but much more difficult variants on the A-side story chapters that forego hidden secrets in favor of remixing the same mechanics in a significantly more challenging level. The win condition for these, rather than simply arriving at the end screen as is the case with the A-sides, is collecting a red crystal heart. So great, we can totally bypass the blue crystal hearts in the A-sides and just go straight for those B-sides. They're tricky, certainly more so than most of the challenges in the A-sides, but they aren't that tough. If you've made it to the summit in the story, you can probably knock out the first few B-sides without much difficulty, and because they don't introduce any new mechanics, they're mostly fair. There's a few falling platforms which are unfair like we've discussed, but there aren't any items hidden behind fish blocks, since these are less worried about obscuring progression with secrets and more worried about tight, unforgiving platforming challenges. Unforgiving and brutally difficult is not unfair though, and though some of the challenges might best be described that way, particularly those in the chapter 6 and 7 B-sides, that doesn't make them unfair. False walls don't exist because, again, there's no hidden secrets in these levels. Try, die a million times, but get a little further each time and nab those red hearts at the end so we can bypass the heart barrier in the core. But we have to first unlock those B-sides, and the way that is done is by finding the hidden cassette tapes on the A-sides. Luckily, these are hidden in considerably less obscure locations than the crystal hearts. Let's take a peek at the location of each one to see what we need to do to grab those suckers. The first one is in a good spot, off the main path a bit, but still discoverable to those with a keen eye. From this room here, you go up and to the left, behind this grab activated platform. In the next room, ride this platform up to launch yourself to the top. Even if you've never been here, you've seen this room before. This room is shared with a room that is required to progress, even though the 2 sections don't connect. Behind this platform is a false wall of sorts with light shining through, a pretty clear indicator that there's something there. Entering this room will introduce you to the signature B-side mechanic, beat blocks. These blocks will flip back and forth in time with the music. It's a bit tricky, but totally fair. Chapter 2 is another one where you can see the entrance to the B-side room without even realizing it. In this first big room that forks off in 5 directions, there's a dream block at the very bottom leading off the screen. Once you activate all the blocks, you can dash through here and get another B-block challenge. All good. Chapter 3 is interesting because it actually allows you a sneak peek at the B-side challenge room long before you actually access it. After your very first encounter with Mr. Oshiro, you navigate this long room with the little dark matter guys circling and enter this room with the locked door. The key is in the room above. In that room is also a false wall in the bottom corner near the entrance. Go through it, past this room, and enter the next. You can see this block in the ceiling, which, side note, has the breakable block animation but has no collision, so acts more like a false wall. Anyway, go up to the next room and take the path on the right to enter this little viewing chamber for the B-side room. You can't get to it yet. You come back here near the very end of the level. After you collect the final key of the level, in the long room here, you'll see another glowing false wall. Good again. Chapter 4's cassette might be tricky to locate. In the first part of the level, you'll get to this room with the wind blowing against you while you try to navigate up these 3 clouds to the end. If, on the third one, you decide to jump with the wind, you can just make it to this ledge, pass through this room, and into the cassette room. Like I said, this one is among the toughest to spot, but this ledge is visible on the screen from the start, and there's not even a false wall to try and trick you. I'm going to call this one good too. If the requirements for Chapter 5's cassette were in any other chapter, it would be pretty strange, but the exploratory, open-ended nature of this chapter practically begs you to look in every nook and cranny. Entering this room with this giant fish statue, you can move to the red bubble and launch yourself into the next room. You solve a couple of platforming puzzles to unlock subsequent rooms. Then, you have to spot this cracked wall here to enter the cassette room. This one is a little tricky too, but the crack in the wall is enough for me to grant this one as fair. We revisit our good friend Kevin for this next cassette. By guiding him down and noticing that the border has a gap in it, we can direct Kevin to smash into this portion of the wall and head into Chapter 6's cassette room. This is the most demanding platforming challenge of any B-side, but it's definitely fair. Finally, Chapter 7 poses little challenge. Early on in the Celestial Resort section of the level, you enter this room with the dark matter guys dancing all around. It's pretty easy to notice this fellow here, guarding an exit up into another room. Make your way over to get that final B-side cassette, and of course it is perfectly fair. I'd like to point out that the B-side for Chapter 7 is one of only 2 B-sides to actually introduce a brand new mechanic, this special wall bounce. It's introduced explicitly by the tutorial bird from the very beginning, including this dynamic tutorial box that shows the player how to use this new, pretty complex move. This is a move that's actually available from the very beginning, but it's required for progression here. This has no bearing on fairness, but it's unique enough to mention. Excellent. Despite being locked behind some pretty difficult challenges, there's at least 9 crystal hearts that are clearly fair and accessible before entering the core. Remember, we only need 4. With all that behind us, we can crack open the heart barrier and see what the core brings to the table. There are 2 mechanics that are absolutely key to the core. We've touched on the first one already, but it's a good idea to bring it up again since it's so important. The core takes away the restoration of the dash ability when landing on the ground or interacting with certain features that recharge the dash. In fact, there are only 2 ways to regain your dash in this chapter. You can either collect one of the green crystals that have been present in previous chapters, but never as important as they are here, or you can transition across screens. I deemed the game's expectation for the player to observe this last mechanic unfair when talking about the Chapter 2 Crystal Heart. I maintain this belief, but I don't think it's unfair here because this chapter trains the player to carefully ration dashes while moving. It treats the dashes as a resource, and any method of obtaining more dashes will be much more obvious. It's not even something that the player might notice immediately. They enter a new room and they begin a challenge with the dash because of course they do. Dashing is how the game works. But the player will notice this throughout the course of the chapter. They'll notice it not because it's ever required to accomplish some task like it is for the Crystal Heart, but because it's so helpful in making the whole chapter feel feel more seamless. The second main mechanic is this right here, the swap between a fire theme and an ice theme, facilitated by these switches. This is a much more substantial mechanic, and it really is the fundamental mechanic of the core. Aside from the distinctive visual transformation, you can see that hitting this switch will transfer all these obstacles between their fire and ice variants, which have radically different behaviors. You could make an argument to call this mechanic slightly inconsistent, since the switches themselves sometimes only flip in one way and sometimes can go back and forth. But the usable switches always glow, and the switches that might make a room unplayable if they were flipped are disabled, so that the player can't accidentally hit one and set themselves up for failure. The only other mechanic in the whole chapter that could be considered unfair is at the very end, where falling off the screen, a requirement to complete the level, simply loops the player back to the top of the screen, arcade game style. But this room is very clearly distinct, not just from the chapter, but from every other room in the entire game. The design is abstract and strange. Your movement mechanics are slower and floatier. Plus, this mechanic makes it literally impossible to die right at the end of the chapter. Like the B-sides, you collect the crystal heart at the end of the chapter to complete it. Spectacular. So we've managed to collect our 8 green flags and our 4 crystal hearts. We've reached the heart of the mountain ending. When you see this screen, you can rest easy, knowing that you've completed what I would consider to be the core game, pun intended. There's still plenty more to do. You're maybe halfway through all the game's content at this point, but everything from here on out is optional. If we go back and look at our 5 endings to Celeste, we can see that we've passed the 2 mandatory screens. We've actually gotten most of the way to the 3rd screen too, the farewell screen. I struggled a bit as to where to put this in the sequence of endings, since it's technically accessible before completing even a single B-side, while still being a challenge right up there with the C-sides. But I decided to use the same standard that the game uses, and have it mark the end of the B-side challenges. While it does become available as soon as you achieve the Heart of the Mountain ending, it's only half available at this point. About halfway through Farewell, there's a tease in this room where you're shown the game's only gray crystal heart. Collecting this heart only triggers a cutscene and a shattering of this heart. In other words, it doesn't count. After this, you proceed into the next room to see a heart barrier with a requirement for 15 hearts. If you got to this point right after completing the core, then you're a mad lad with huge platforming skills and you should take a break. Just go get a glass of water, maybe read a book. Relax, man, you've got this game on lock. Probably, maybe. But for the rest of us mere mortals, getting to this point will be next to impossible without playing those B-sides. Like I already mentioned, the B-sides don't introduce many new mechanics at this point, so they're fair. It was only the cassettes hidden in the A-sides that gave us any trouble, and they were mostly fine. The last cassette is the core, and we already have it. You have to grab it as part of the progression for the completion of A-side. It's the last challenge of the chapter, right before the wonky loop room that you collect the heart in, so it's very fair. While we're talking about tough tasks, I'm going to reiterate that extreme challenge does not ever reach the level of unfair just by being difficult enough. If a player can look at a challenge and know what to do, then as long as all of the individual mechanics are fair, the challenge is too. By the way, challenge is anything from a tricky B-side room to the farewell golden strawberry. Don't worry, we'll talk about those in a bit. Even the most trying of endurance challenges isn't any more unfair than the weakest parts of the challenge as a whole. We'll touch on this again later in a bit more detail, but it's important to keep that in mind. Alright, back to the heart barrier. Well, these heart barriers. You see, there are actually 2 15 heart barriers in the game. This one here, for Farewell, is probably the second that players will see. The first one lives here, at the beginning of the core B-side. Though neither is strictly necessary to complete for the other, I'm going to say that if you're trying to go for this ending, then you're going to see these 2 in this order. This means that to complete Farewell, you need to complete the core B-side. To do that, you must have collected every single crystal heart available to you up until now, A and B-side. Try as I did, I've gone as long as I can while dodging the crystal heart in the A side of chapter 4. So let's take a look. When you're navigating through this room with a ton of forking paths to strawberries, you'll eventually make it here. Entering this small room, you might notice this false wall under the water. It's marked by a small crack, and this kind of crack is always used to denote a false wall. Fine. You swim through it and into this room where you can collect a strawberry. At this point, you'll almost certainly notice the big ol' crack on the far wall. Dashing into it will break it, and you can enter this room. The room is taller than it is wide, and you can navigate the platforms to work your way up to the top and notice the crystal heart, floating pretty far out of reach. You're not going to be able to access this with traditional mechanics. If you're anything like me, you probably also notice this white block here at the bottom of the room. Though it may seem innocuous to some, its placement here is hugely conspicuous to anyone who has played Super Mario Bros. 3. In fact, the remake for the Game Boy Advance was the second video game I ever played, right behind the GBA's Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. In other words, I knew just what to do with this block. I walked up to it, crouched atop it, and after a moment, aha, I sunk behind it. This was an incredible blast of nostalgia, and I was able to navigate on the walls of the background to climb up to the Crystal Heart and collect it. When I first did this, I absolutely loved it. It was a blast to my past, and a wonderful nod to this classic masterpiece. What's the harm? The harm is that this is totally random and obscure to anyone who hasn't played Mario 3. In fact, if a player hasn't played that game, a game, by the way, in a totally different series, one that predates Celeste by 30 years, then you might as well have provided the instructions in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. There's an argument to be made that Mario 3 is the best platformer ever made. Heck, there's probably an argument to be made that Mario 3 is the best video game ever made. And if any game is a part of some metaphysical canon of all gaming, then it just might be Mario 3. But that canon doesn't exist. There should be no expectation that a player has played any other game in order to be able to advance in this game they're playing right now. I don't even like it when sequels expect that players have played previous games and simply throw those previous mechanics into the player's path without giving them at least a brief explanation. And Celeste is not a sequel to Mario 3. If you're still not convinced that this is unfair, try to imagine this the other way around. Imagine if the next 2D Mario game included, at the end of a level and required to unlock some secret stage, one of these blocks from Chapter 5. Mario has to fling himself across the gap here in order to make it to the ending. It's easy to see how this would be a ridiculous, unfair inclusion that only serves to bring down the rest of the game that follows. I'm utterly baffled that this was even included in the game, and it earns the first nomination of the most unfair thing in Celeste. Right, let's move on. We've gone into detail about each of the Crystal Hearts now, and you're gonna have to grab them all to move to the core B-side. This might be the toughest challenge you've yet faced, possibly second to the Chapter 7 B-side, which is never more mechanically difficult than Chapter 8, but is much longer, with a lot of the challenge coming from endurance. Like the B-sides before, it introduces no new mechanics, and for this reason is fair. Grab the red heart at the end to complete this chapter, which unlocks your C-sides and your golden strawberries, which we'll talk about briefly in a bit. Before that though, we need to head back into Farewell. Now that we can break this barrier, let's take a closer look at the mechanics of Farewell, both before and after the barrier. We see just about every mechanic from the entire game return here, including certain chapters' unique mechanics, like dream blocks and these grab-activated dash blocks, albeit textured differently. More interesting are the 10 mechanics that Farewell introduces. You can see them here. Most of these mechanics are more augmentations to previous ones than fully new mechanics. The double dash that you learn at the end of Chapter 6 is now relegated to a unique crystal to pick up. Beat blocks have variants with 3 or 4 different colors. The electric damage zones are toggleable if this breaker box is present. Even that helpful bluebird acts as a cutscene trigger and a battle in bubble, which itself is also present here. No, the only wholly new level mechanics here are the jellyfish and the pufferfish. The jellyfish is an object that you hold in the same way that you hold Theo when escaping the Mirror Temple in Chapter 5. While holding it, it allows you to glide by significantly decreasing your fall speed and giving you more time to move midair. There are certain surfaces that cause the jellyfish to vanish upon contact. The pufferfish has 2 different behaviors depending on which part of it you make contact with. If you bounce atop it, it will give you a small hop, like the ice balls from the core, and the pufferfish will drop down a ways. Hitting it from the bottom will cause it to explode, sending you flying in the direction that you made contact in. Both of these actions replenish your dash, and both of these mechanics are fair. You also learn a new, very complex movement mechanic, the wave dash. Like the Chapter 7 B-side wall bounce, this was always possible, but the wave dash is considerably more complex than any other movement mechanic in Celeste. It allows for a new kind of movement, one where your dash is less for the range increase that it often is before this, and more for tighter precision platforming. This is taught to you very explicitly. You actually get a PowerPoint presentation on how to do it, along with a screen in the background for the next few challenges to demonstrate exactly how you should move. This is fair too. In fact, regularly completing Farewell is fair, save for some falling platforms that are present everywhere in the game. Though Farewell is challenging as an endurance test, being the longest chapter by a significant margin, no single obstacle is going to be more difficult than the most difficult challenges that you've just completed in the B-sides. It's the act of stringing them together in sequence that increases the difficulty. But difficulty is not unfairness, and this is a fair chapter. And that's that. Your Farewell ending is less fair than the Heart of the Mountain ending because you have to collect the crystal hearts that are unfair, including the ridiculous Chapter 4 heart, but it's still pretty good. Unlike the other chapters, which have crystal hearts and cassettes to unlock more sides, Farewell has only the one side. You get the Bluebird collectible that we talked about at the very beginning of the video for achieving this ending. So that's 3 endings down, 2 to go. The next ending is the seaside ending. Achieving this ending requires one final heart barrier, this one, which requires 23 hearts to break open. To get here, you must have at least completed the Chapter 8 B-side, which is what unlocks the seasides to begin with. Like the B-sides before, these aren't here to teach you new mechanics. They simply remix the old mechanics you've been using the whole time into unbelievably difficult challenges. The seasides are no joke. There's not a pixel of room for error on any jump, anytime, ever. Completing these takes precision and timing, a mastery of all techniques, and more patience than you can imagine. But these are very short. Each only has 3 screens, not any longer than the larger screens from the A or B sides. Though the challenge is grueling, it is possible and fair, mostly. See, there's one aspect of these challenges that is not completely fair. Hearts suspended over danger. Several crystal hearts are floating over either the void or spikes. This is the case on some of the B-sides, but it's most prevalent here while playing the C-sides, since the hearts live at the end of some brutally difficult rooms, and dying means you have to restart the room. If you've collected a heart, you'll remember that the game applies this slowing effect to Madeline before collecting the heart and displaying the heart's name. This slowing is not just a cinematic effect, but actually still interacts with the game in regular ways. In other words, you're still vulnerable during this slowing effect, and collecting one of these hearts at the wrong angle can send you careening into the bottom of the screen to your death. That's right, if you're not careful, you can die even after you've completed the level. It's difficult for me to grasp how this oversight made it into the game at all. Dying this way may seem unlikely if you've never played the game, or even if you have and just haven't experienced this to begin with. But take a trip to any Celeste forum and you'll see dozens of people who've experienced this most heartless of deaths. This is the kind of error that you only ever make once. Of course, once you learn that a chapter doesn't end immediately after you meet its ending condition, it's something you prioritize. People who argue that this is a good mechanic might say that it's part of the challenge. It's designed to ensure that you plan ahead, so that when you lose control, you don't die prematurely. But listen to any review or editorial on Celeste, and you'll inevitably encounter something equivalent to raving about the precise, exacting controls of the game. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that the controls of this game go a long way in explaining why it is so popular and good. A mechanic that removes controls in an unpredictable way and gives a chance for you to fail the hardest of challenges this game has to offer through no fault of your own, that's a candidate for the most unfair thing in Celeste right there. But fine. It's an admittedly small problem, and one that most players won't encounter. Clearing these hearts allows you to break through the final 23 heart barrier to the seaside for Chapter 8, which teaches you a new mechanic. Your last one, being only 3 screens away from having to overcome every main challenge the game has to offer, it's a little surprising to see it here. It's a powerful mechanic too. I don't really know what to call it. Big Dash seems a little dismissive, and the fan term Hyper Dash is kind of strange too. It's got a lot in common with the Wave Dash though, so I'll call it a false Wave Dash. False, because you don't get to keep your dash at the end. The mechanic is fair and the tutorial is fine, so you can grab that final crystal heart and know that you've accomplished the content complete ending. Let's take a step back before we investigate the final ending and return to our list of collectibles. Here they are, sorted by which ending they're collected in. You'll notice that despite the fact that we're 80% the way through the endings, and more than that of this video, we've still got over 200 collectibles to talk about. We're gonna have to breeze through them. Let's make some quick cuts before going any further. The first collectible is the minigame, Pico 8, or Celeste Classic. You collect it here in Chapter 3. It's behind a very obvious false wall, and playing it once unlocks it on the title screen. No problems, this is fine. Next, the 25 golden strawberries. Upon beating the Chapter 8 B-side, you unlock all the C-sides and all the golden strawberries at the same time. These golden strawberries are present at the beginning of every level and act as a sort of master endurance challenge for each of the 25 unique chapters. Beat it without dying. The strawberry floats behind you as you navigate the level and gets collected upon reaching the final screen of the A-side chapters or upon collecting the crystal hearts of the B and C-side chapters. Ironically, they are completed immediately upon collecting the heart, and even dying on one of the C-side heart slowdowns like we talked about will still award you the golden strawberry. These are immense challenges, most of which are still not completed on my save file, but I've said many times that there is no challenge that is sufficiently hard as to be unfair, and even though these challenges are tedious and probably not really fun, aside from those completionist masochists, they are not unfair. Finally, the golden flags for each level are collected by running through the entire level while collecting every single regular or red strawberry. You can die, you can pause, and as long as you clear the chapter with all the strawberries and without ever quitting to the map screen, you've got the golden flag. These are only as unfair as the most unfair strawberry in each chapter and are exactly that unfair, so I won't bring these up separately again. Cool. We've got 177 strawberries left to talk about, so let's get cracking. First though, you might be wondering why I have this ending here as the very last you would encounter during the game. After all, any player is very likely to collect several strawberries before they complete even the very first chapter of the game. Indeed, by the time they complete the farewell ending, they could have collected each and every one of the 177 strawberries that I'm discussing here. Shouldn't this ending be earlier? I could say something about how you can't really 100% clear the game until you get all the golden strawberries, and that doesn't happen until after the Chapter 8 Seaside. But honestly, the main reason that this is at the very end is because some of these strawberry challenges are actually nuts. Since they're not mandatory before this point, I thought it best to save this discussion for the end of the game. As I'm describing the challenges you'll face for each strawberry, you'll see a code like this in the top corner of the screen. This 3-figure code is the chapter number, the section number, and the strawberry number. You can see your collected strawberries split up the same way on the pause screen of every chapter after you've cleared it, as well as on the chapter select screen, so you can understand what I'm talking about here. Now, a brief overview of what a strawberry is. A strawberry is a completely optional collectible that sits somewhere in each of the game's 8 main A-side chapters, waiting to be discovered. Anytime you touch a strawberry, it begins to follow behind you. As soon as you return to a safe piece of ground, the strawberry will be collected. Usually, all regular ground is safe, but there are some challenges that require you to collect a strawberry and then navigate the rest of the challenge in order to collect it, like this one in Chapter 3. Some strawberries just sit in place, while winged strawberries will fly up and off the screen if you dash in the same room. They are otherwise of identical value. There's also a handful of seeded strawberries, which are more unique challenges that involve collecting all the seeds in a specific room without ever landing on the ground. Again, no extra value in these. No content is locked behind any amount of strawberries, unless you count a slightly different image for the epilogue screen or a ribbon on your save file as content. You can get your strawberries whenever you want. So, strawberries are optional collectibles that don't themselves alter platforming in any way. How can they contribute to unfairness in the game? Though the strawberries don't affect platforming, they do affect the level design with one key final mechanic. In fact, you probably didn't even consider it a mechanic. It's this: the edge of the screen working as a transition from the room that you're currently in to the room that transitioning links to. It's best thought of as a doorway. If you see a path to the very edge of the screen, chances are that it leads to another. Well, except for a path to the bottom of the screen. If you arrive at the bottom of the screen, you're instantly killed. Often called a bottomless pit or a void, these act as a row of spikes, invisible and stationed right at the edge of the screen. Almost every room in the game, from the prologue to the summit and beyond, has a bottomless pit somewhere in it. Perhaps you can already see where I'm going with this. Even though you're taught numerous times that going to the bottom of the screen always leads to death, this is actually not true. There are a select number of bottom screen exits that take you to another room. There's one in Chapter 1 actually, right here. This particular example is conspicuous enough that I bet most people who navigated here didn't really think twice about it. But if you step back and really consider this mechanic, look at what it is. An instant death mechanic is taught to you over and over again at almost every opportunity. Then you actually encounter something that looks like this instant death mechanic and is actually a door to another room. How can you tell? You can't. Toss yourself to death at every opportunity and hope that eventually you'll live and make it into another room. Good luck. Look, I get it if you don't immediately agree with this. Surely there are some bottom screen exits that are just fine, right? What about ones like this, you ask, where it's so obvious that you need to proceed this way? It's the only way available. Or this one. Sure, there's another way out of this room, but the light is glowing from the bottom. Or how about this one, where you come up into this room and eventually have to exit the way you came? Surely these are fine, right? In short, no. Though you may find it obvious that a drop is safe or unsafe sometimes, or even most of the time, and to be clear, I don't think this, you have to forgive the instances where this is not the case. Okay, look at these drops. They're each in Chapter 7, some in adjacent rooms as a matter of fact, and it's not possible to tell them apart. One of these bottom screen exits leads to a couple of very good strawberry challenge rooms, and the other two lead to death. Which one is it? Unless you've already discovered this particular exit, you can't tell. It's actually impossible. I said very early on that death is a pretty mild punishment in Celeste. This is still true on an individual scale, but there might be thousands of separate bottom bottomless pits in this game. Knowing that any non-zero number of these pits could lead to strawberries means that, in order to be thorough, you have to investigate every single one. If each death averaged to 3 seconds in order to respawn and return to that same point, you're still looking at upwards of an hour just throwing yourself into holes to see if there's a room there. And honestly, 3 seconds is very generous, given that you're usually respawned at the beginning of the room. That's a bit exaggerated. After all, your progress bar on the pause screen will give you an idea of where a strawberry is hidden in relation to others, but that betrays the larger point that it didn't need to be this way. Off the top of my head, I can think of 2 solutions to get rid of this problem entirely. The best solution, and arguably the easiest, is to just not have bottomless pits. Wherever they currently exist in the game, just fill them with spikes, crystals, dark matter, an army of fish, hope for Half-Life 3, whatever. These are all exactly as deadly as the bottomless pits, except they would never be disguised doors. That way, if there is a gap in the bottom of the screen, it would come across not as a design flaw, but as a clever secret, hidden where few would know to look, but obvious enough to be totally fair. The second solution would be to design bottom screen exits to look different from regular bottomless pits. Maybe some light shining through like the one from Chapter 2, or some subtle particle effects that make them distinct from the bottomless pits elsewhere in the level. Sure, this would make them less hidden and secret, but it also wouldn't be a frustrating slog to discover these secrets. Running across the screen now is every strawberry where passing through a bottom screen exit is required. Not every example of a bottom screen exit in the game. God, I just don't have the patience to record and replay every single one of them here, not to mention that Adobe Premiere timeline would probably crash my dinky computer, but enough so that hopefully you can understand that this problem isn't insignificant. In fact, the bottom screen exit is unfair enough to be our third and final candidate for most unfair thing in Celeste. Before we talk about the 2 unique strawberries, here's each of the strawberry lists for the chapters that have them. They're color-coded, so that green strawberries are totally fair, yellows are unfair by some mechanic that we talked about earlier, and red ones require using a bottom screen exit. For our very last act, let's talk about the 2 unique strawberries briefly. The first challenge is available from the very start of the game. It is technically possible to navigate all of the Chapter 1A side without using a single dash. If you make it to the end of the chapter, you will find the only winged golden strawberry waiting for you. No mincing words, this challenge is broken. It requires some insane knowledge of the game's various mechanics, abuse of pixel-thin hitbox errors, some frame-perfect jumps and actions, and an overall unreasonable amount of precision. I've never even come close to this challenge, and I'm no chump. It's been suggested that one of the main techniques, known as the spike jump, is a bit easier to do with a keyboard on a computer, but I don't play that way. Maybe it's possible, but it's so ridiculously intricate and hidden that it sort of bypasses unfair and arrives at Easter egg status. Don't get me wrong, this challenge is so unfair, it's ridiculous. All footage here is just footage that I've collected either by cheating my way to it or by borrowing footage from this guy, who's one of a few people who's actually mad and has managed to collect both the regular golden strawberry and the winged golden strawberry in one run. To be clear, this is not required. You can die as many times as you need and still collect that winged golden strawberry, but it's still nuts. The last challenge of the entire game then is the moonberry. Hidden at the very end of Chapter 9, this berry is pretty much just a regular strawberry with an insane challenge. As you navigate the gauntlet of a last room in Farewell, you'll notice some platforms randomly scattered among the lightning, unreachable as you work your way through. Well, it turns out that these platforms aren't so random. At the very end, you smash a breaker box and shut off all the electricity in the room. It's possible to very carefully navigate the platforms up to the top of the room and enter this one. You're trapped. This gap here leads nowhere, and the only way out is trapped behind a wall. I'm not going to beat around the bush here either. In order to move on, you have to kill yourself using the small crystal placed in the room. You'll respawn it in the gap and move on. The word I've settled on to describe this piece of challenge is dumb. It seems to suggest that death can occasionally and effortlessly bring you to previously inaccessible places that are not otherwise accessible. The rest of the challenge is made of brutally difficult platforming, which I have yet to complete, but am thoroughly enjoying. This one unnecessary and uninteresting room sours it considerably, and yes, it's unfair. That's it. Kind of a downer to end what has otherwise been an incredible journey, but that is the final piece of the puzzle. We've completed all that Celeste has to offer. We've reached the final ending of Celeste, and indeed, the ending of this analysis video on Celeste. There are just 2 orders of business left. First, we need to take a look at the highly sought after award for the most unfair thing in Celeste. Let's have our nominees come back to the stage. First, there's the Chapter 4 Crystal Heart, which requires knowledge from a game that's 30 years old and in no way related to Celeste. Second, we have the Crystal Hearts that are suspended over danger, which can kill you even after you've conquered some of the most daunting challenges in the game, forcing you to recomplete them because of an oversight. Finally, we welcome back bottom screen exits for hiding copious secrets and progression options despite looking exactly like the instant death bottomless pits, often even being placed in adjacent rooms. And the winner is... bottom screen exits! Yeah, look, let's be done with the joke. All 3 of these mechanics are just plain silly additions to a game that is as polished, popular, and just plain good as Celeste. But bottom screen exits are particularly menacing because they're just as unfair as something like false walls, while also punishing you for guessing wrong. Beyond that, bottom screen exits are worse than the other candidates in a cruel way: abundance. There's only 1 Crystal Heart that you need to have played Mario 3 to get, and only a few on which you need to be careful lest you unfairly die. But there are several bottom screen exits in every chapter, each hiding those precious strawberries among fake death zones. This is startlingly unfair and easily earns the title of most unfair thing in Celeste. Now we'll swing to the scores, what we've all been waiting for. Let's make a fairness report card for Celeste, and we'll grade each of the 5 endings separately. The summit ending gets an A+. I'd take off points for the falling blocks and the fish blocks. That said, I can't stress enough how great this score is, not only compared to the rest of the endings in this game, but compared to many other games in this genre and in general. I don't know if I'll do this kind of video again for other games. Just writing this script took me maybe 20 hours, not to mention the fact that the thankless YouTube algorithms, or maybe the fact that this video somehow still sucks, may see this video languish to the single-digit view count for all of eternity. But rest assured, this is an amazing result for any game. The Heart of the Mountain ending gets an A-. The Crystal Heart mechanics of the A-sides are just too unfair to overlook, and forcing a player to navigate to hidden challenges if they want to complete the game fairly is not good game design. The Farewell ending gets a B+. You can steer clear of the unfair Crystal Heart challenges in the Heart of the Mountain ending, but you have to deal with all of them here, and that brings it down quite a bit. Perhaps it's balanced out by the abundance of content, but that doesn't make it any more fair. The Content Complete ending also gets a B+. This is just a small step below the Farewell ending because, though the floating hearts are unfair, there's a pretty good chance that you'll never see this problem. Most who do only see it once, and then they learn how to avoid it in the future. But it's that momentary loss of control that brings things down, if only slightly. Finally, the 100% completion ending gets a C. Not only do the paths to the strawberries lead you through an abundance of almost every unfair mechanic this video has discussed, but also introduces a litany of new ones. The bottom screen exits are honestly baffling. So is the winged golden dashless strawberry from Chapter 1. All in all, the prospect of collecting all the strawberries isn't more difficult than any of the B or C sides, but it requires so much guesswork and unnecessary death that it's kind of a shame. And for a single score all wrapped up together, Celeste gets an A-. I mentioned earlier that the Heart of the Mountain ending is the real, true main campaign end to the game, and everything afterwards is post-game. I stand by that, of course, and say that this game is pretty fair, but not perfect. Let's temper this criticism with one more thought before wrapping up the video. This A- is really just a score in one class of consideration for the game. I haven't even passed judgment on the game's presentation, story, the movement and mechanics themselves, and so much more. Celeste is one of my favorite games of all time, be it fair or not. I think that even some of the mechanics that aren't fair, as I've described, are still likely to be discovered and even enjoyed by players. This is edging dangerously close to review territory, in my case just gushing about the game for the most part, but Celeste instills in players this innate desire to see and explore every corner, every little detail of this game. It trains you to look for inconsistencies in the world and rewards those who do so relentlessly. For everything we've talked about today, calling something unfair has not meant that the game asks too much of the player, but rather doesn't make it clear exactly what it wants from the player, by making certain aspects either too obscure, too unpredictable, or forcing similar objects to act in different ways arbitrarily. Remember, I've used unfair to mean something that couldn't be learned or mastered. As much as I've tried to keep bias out of it, I can't help that my criticisms of the game's design, while based mostly on objective facts, I think, have been influenced by my own experiences and those of others who I've talked to or watched in playing the game. I honestly can't imagine that anyone has sat through this whole video without first playing and loving Celeste. Honestly, I can't imagine that anyone has sat sat through this monstrosity at all. But if you've somehow made it to the end here and haven't played Celeste, I give it the most hearty of recommendations. It's beautiful, gripping, powerful, and just might be the best 2D platformer ever made. Thank you for watching my first Volcaronite video ever. This is a project that I've been working on sporadically for over 2 years, and finally coming to the end of it has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I couldn't have done this project without the help of the people you see on screen now. Thank you, all of you, from the bottom of my heart. And, most importantly, thank you for watching this monster. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like. I've got several videos in the pipeline, so if you'd like to be the first to see them, please subscribe to my channel. I'm really looking forward to sharing them with you. That's all I've got for today. Enjoy your day and take care.